Hey guys, I've been getting a lot of questions about the in-ear monitor mix rack that I built for my band Auras for our live show, so I'm going to take you through that. Alright, so I'm going to start with the back of the unit. This is what I see from my perspective behind the drum kit. I have this facing me so that I can control the show from here, which is the LP16 by Cymatic Audio. Essentially, it's just a multi-track output sort of hard disk. So you load the tracks in individually, and there are 16 separate outputs on the back that all do individual simultaneous playback. So right below the LP16 is the Behringer XR18. I actually have it flipped onto the inside so that you can actually flip the rack ears on either side that you want, so you can have the outputs facing out, or you can have them facing in the rack, which I chose to do here, mainly so that we can keep all the cabling inside of the case and not have to worry about any excess stuff or unplugging things before we put the lid on. So I have the LP16 sending 4 tracks directly to the Behringer, which goes directly to our ears. And that's the click track, the bass guitar, and tracks left and right, so that's 4 tracks total. And then I have another 4 tracks going directly to the front of the rack, right out of the front rack panel, just for the front of house guy, so that they're mixing whatever they want individually. I have subs, bass guitar, tracks left and right as well for them. But there's expandability. I'm able to do extra guitars on a separate track than the tracks left and right. We can do any sort of additional tracks on separate channels as well. So that's expandable for us at this point. One thing you see here on the side is the Ethernet cable that I'm going to use to plug in the router. We're going to get a permanent router that's hopefully compact and could just stay within the rack, but for now we're using an external one, an old one we used for internet like 10 years ago, and it works fantastic to boost the signal for the Behringer so that your iPad or your iPhone can control it from further away than if it was just using the internal router in the Behringer. And coming out of the left side of the rack, opposite the Ethernet, is a headphone extender cable that I have for my own in-ear mix. This is so that I'm always hardwired and never, worried about dropouts or anything happening, because the rest of the guys, I'm sending their mix through auxiliaries from the Behringer to their in-ear transmitters, and they're wirelessly receiving that from a receiver pack on their belt wherever they are on the stage. All right, flipping back to the front of the rack, this is what faces the front of the stage, or opposite me from behind the drums. And this is where all our cabling will come in and out of. So on the bottom we have just drums, and this is a splitter that's a 3-way splitter, so there's actually 2 outputs on the back and 1 output on the front. And we only have this so we can use 1 output on the back going internally, connecting to the Behringer, which again is flipped inside the rack, so everything is just within, a couple inches of each other. And then the output on the front will go to our front of house engineer, into the snake on stage or wherever, as well as all these other outputs up here, which we have tracks coming from the LP16, which I talked about. So these are the additional outputs that are coming out that are not going into the Behringer. They're identical other than the sub and the click, those are switched, but the bass and the tracks are identical for us, so we want them to hear what we hear. But it's just easier for us to be able to duplicate those channels on the LP16, since there's 16 outputs, and then put them wherever we want, kind of, in the rack. So I can expand to more if I want. I've got 2 outputs in here as well, coming from 5 and 6 auxiliary channels on the Behringer. And in 5 and 6, I'm basically just making custom monitor mixes on stage, because Aaron and Josh, the guitar players, both use wedges on stage for stage sound instead of using guitar cabs or something like that. And this gives us the flexibility to put tracks in there, some bass guitar, maybe some vocals, depending on the venue. If there's a little bit, if there's a slightly underpowered PA or something, we have a little bit more control over what we send there. Over here on the right, you can actually see down here, these are the vocals that we're splitting as well as the drum shells. And I have overheads left and right that are only ever going to our ears, because the front of house, most of the venues we play won't really use overheads. And if they do need cymbal mics of any sort, they can put up their own on top that we won't really hear ourselves. We're just going to hear exactly what we put into here. And then these last 2 are just for guitar inputs. Now, what I love about this Hosa patch bay is that you can reverse any of these channels. So I've actually reversed a bunch of them. So I kept these the same, and I just reversed all these so we can send stuff from inside the rack out. And then we can also send a couple things into the rack that don't need to go anywhere else. They just need to go to our ears. The guitars will go directly in, and then of course I can, you know, change the balance of what's going on in the wedges on stage, but also there's a secondary output on the guys, on the pedals that the guys use. I believe they're using the Helix Stomp pedals, which are great, very little compact guitar pedals that are extremely versatile for what they are, and ultimately they can fit into this rack drawer up here, both of them. So we have possibilities for expandability in the future to be able to house those units inside the rack, do MIDI patch changes and all kinds of things, which the LP16 can also do, run via MIDI. So once everything's patched through the front, basically the Behringer will get every signal that we need, and everyone can customize and individualize their own mix and make sure that it's the way that they want to hear things on stage, more click, less click, more vocals, etc. Each auxiliary goes through a receiver, and these are mono receivers, so they're very, very compact, and they only take up one of those 6 channels. So each of these will get a receiver pack on the other end, which the guy is using on his belt, whoever it is. Headphone input there. It's got an on-off switch so that you don't have to change the volume every time or use the volume knob to turn it on and off, which I know a lot of other packs end up using that. So these end up being really, really handy for us because we're all about being as compact as we possibly can. I think we might even upgrade this unit to one of these as well, so we get even more real estate in the rack. Maybe add some guitar wirelesses. There's a bit of room here to go. This is the in-ear transmitter receiver unit called the U4 by Xvive Audio. And these are wicked too because they end up being battery powered in the same way. So if, you know, before the show, we just end up plugging them in and kind of leaving them there just before things get going, and then once we start up, we can just re-plug in this unit. And I just keep these plugged in just to be safe, but they have like 5 hours or something of battery time. One of the interesting differences between these Xvive transmitters and receivers versus the other ones and the old one that we were using for a while is that these are on a digital frequency, so 2.4 gigahertz, which is kind of the same as what your wireless internet would be at. Whereas these are radio frequency, so there's a little bit of a high-end roll-off or a little bit of just different styles of interference and static depending on how far you get away from the unit. So with these being battery-powered, we're able to just unplug them and quickly get them via a longer extension cord or via a longer XLR extension, and we can kind of put them anywhere on the stage because they run off the battery and they run for 5 hours or so. So we can put it closer to the signal that's receiving it and make sure that there's no dropouts or frequency issues. So there you go. That's the in-ear monitor mix rack that we use for the Auras live show. If you've got any questions or anything like that, leave a comment below, send me a DM. If you're trying to do the same type of thing yourself, this hopefully is a decent model to follow, but there's different products depending on the region that you live in. So good luck to you, and thanks again.